why do we need to talk about methane? I think the basic fact here is methane is like 80 times more potent than carbon dioxide. And that creates a huge volume of emissions as a consequence, the equivalent of all the cars on the road. And why hasn't this been addressed yet? The interesting thing is, like you say, the technologies are there, the abatement technologies. But this is where MiQ comes in with certified gas. What we are doing is creating a grading system, and which then leads to measurements and determining of the methane emissions. And we believe firmly that what then can happen is you come back to the theory, what you measure is what you manage. And that's what's going to happen now.
So look, the technology is there. The amazing data is there as well. You can see anywhere along your pipelines or amongst your facilities where the seepages are. Again, is it just down to greed?
No, I think, you can see certain seepages, but it's actually quite complicated to do it properly on determining the methane emissions, because there is a variety of technologies that are out there, but none of the technologies actually is able to properly do it in one go, have that absolute kind of precision. And that's why we developed the certification system under which you have a variety of technologies that kind of create that grade for a facility. And a facility is like a very large asset. Think a field, or think a couple of platforms together. And it's with that you can then start to grade these facilities. And so we've got a grading system that goes from A to F. And that then determines the companies where they sit in the pecking order on their facilities. And that's when I think they can start to clean this up. Now, should they have done more in the past? One can clearly argue that. But we think that transparency is what's needed to drive that change. You need the transparency to have the metrics. Once you have the metrics, then the classical market behavior kicks in, and people are, especially the laggards, are then going to be forced to clean up their acts.
Yeah, and you need the political will, and something seems to have changed with the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States. It's got the US much more focused on these climate goals, and it's forcing the rest of the world to think hard about how it responds. How important do you think in the round this is going to turn out to be?
Well, I think that there's a lot of, indeed, like you say, legislative initiatives that are out there. Now, that said, what we're also seeing, it's quite a lot of variety. And again, methane emissions is not that, to do it properly, is not that straightforward a subject. The other thing is, it's not necessarily, there's a lot of patchwork. It's going to be from different areas. So we absolutely welcome that, but it's going to take time to implement that. And we're not so sure that we have the time, or more importantly, the methane emissions, as you alluded to in the beginning, they can be addressed. And so why wait longer? And so that's why we think we should address them this decade. Our view here is that the methane emissions in the oil and gas, all of them, so all of them is give or take all the cars on the road in CO2 equivalents. We think the vast majority can be addressed this decade. So we don't have to wait for 2040 or 50 targets. And if we do that, we are talking about the equivalent of taking around 1 billion cars off the roads. So it is by far the low-hanging fruit when it comes to addressing climate change. And that can be done now. And so we need to get started with that today, rather than waiting for further regulation to come in.
Can I ask you specifically about the US LNG exports to Europe, and to what extent you're satisfied with the cleanliness, should we say, from an environmental perspective, of that LNG that's being shipped into Europe now?
Yeah, I mean, as it stands currently, if you don't use certified gas to ship in the LNG, then actually you don't know the provenance of the LNG you're buying, because then basically you are buying the LNG on some average of everything being produced in the US. And even around that, there is debate on what that should be. So the only way to do this properly, again, is with certified gas. So you have the certification that comes with the cargo landed in Europe. And we're seeing utilities in Europe that are clearly starting to look into that. And then you can then decide to buy lower methane gas or very low methane gas, but you now know the provenance. The difference between methane and some other attributes that you also have in commodities is that you can't, when the cargo lands in Europe, you can't then determine the methane emissions by kind of looking at the cargo. The emissions happened beforehand. And so that's why you need a concept called certification to kind of track that along the supply chain. And I absolutely, I mean, we are totally in favor that that's what needs to happen.